What's up, gang? What's up, party people? um, this video is about Team America, World Police, and I gotta start by saying this. Like, there were like 8 or so comments on this movie. One, I'm convinced that you guys, those of you who watched it, only watched like the first 5 minutes. Because everybody's comments were like, "Oh, well, just look at the first 5 minutes. They blew up Paris. It was crazy." Um, that's funny. But no one, not one of you, mentioned the puppets. Like, why puppets? Why poorly, like very poorly uh, administered puppets? Like, it's so hard to ignore that part of the movie and none of you mentioned it. It's just, the puppets, it's beyond silly, right? Obviously, it's silly, it's funny just to see these puppets playing this out. But to think that it wasn't 100% on purpose, because this movie was historically impossible to make. You look at any interviews with Trey Parker and Matt Stone, they're like, it sucked. Like, I wanted to murder somebody every day because of the complications of you know, the puppets and just all that stuff. Um, so like, and it's silly, and this will come up. This will come up a lot over the course of the session. Like, in many cases, I think this is a blanket. By the way, it's cold in my basement. Um, the stupider something is, the more meaningful it can be if we allow it to. This will come up in the Always Sunny video. But it's certainly the case with South Park. It's so, sometimes things are so dumb that distracts you from what it's trying to say. That's where comedy kind of is misunderstood, right? And South Park has fallen into that trap where people who don't get it or don't take the time to try and really think about what it's about are just like, oh, it's just those four foul mouthed kids being disgusting. And you'll watch Team America, which is, I mean, couldn't be more about something in a comedy, but they'll say, oh, it's that stupid puppet movie. Right? And yeah, if you're going to be that person, then you're going to miss out on a lot of stuff and you're going to be part of the problem. Um, so I'm going to start with the puppets for you guys. I don't know if any of you thought about it and just thought didn't want to write about it, comment about it, but or if you just were like, yeah, it's weird that there's puppets, but the puppet metaphor, it's a it's a metaphor, obviously, but it goes. I think it goes beyond the surface interpretation, which is like we're all puppets, right? We're all puppets, and we're being manipulated by someone else. Like, it goes beyond that, and it implicates this movie implicates the people pulling the strings by how blatantly poorly they are doing so. Does that make sense? So if Team America, let's say, is a metaphor for America, it is. Not if it is, it is. And we're watching these puppets and they're just clumsily just like bumping into each other and everything. It's not necessarily a fact that we're all puppets. It's the fact that not only are we puppets, but the people pulling the strings are arguably the worst uh, culprits of all. Does that make sense? I'm not. I'm not articulating this the way I want to. Um, it would be easy to write this movie off and say, "Oh yeah, I get it. We're all puppets." But no, the criticism is more of the people pulling the strings of the puppets throughout the whole movie, and who's pulling the strings of the puppets in 2004, post 9/11 American government. It's the Bush administration. So it's this veiled criticism of them specifically because Bush is never mentioned in the film at all, specifically. But I think that's the illusion that, to allusion that they're making is that not only are we all puppets, we are poorly administered puppets. So, boom. Um, yeah, there's never a mention of Bush, which is interesting. I'm going to talk about bias for a minute. Like, there's so much, I mean, it's so much worse now than it was in 2004, but everything is biased, right? Every piece of information you get, you have to be like, well, who's saying it? Where is it coming from? And the bias is so ridiculous and polarized across the board. And my larger argument is that you have it's not going to be unbiased because I don't think anything is anymore. Truth is biased now, right? Facts are biased because of the way everybody spins them to their favor, whatever it is. But you have the best chance, comedy gives you the best chance of avoiding that bias. And people say, "Oh, comedy's liberal," but maybe that might be the case, and some are worse than others. Like Bill Maher's is sort of like way out there. But in general, the concept of comedy isn't biased, or it's trying not to be biased. It's trying to get to a truth. It's trying to figure things out. It's looking at things from different perspectives. All healthy activities, by the way. But it's the least biased place to get information. I'm not saying it's without bias. I think this movie is a perfect fits right into that. It was equally praised by the left and right. Like, when was the last time that you heard of that? Where both sides of the aisle are like, yeah, so the liberal side was all about how it criticizes America and all these kinds of things, and the world police, policing the world, all that stuff. And the right was like, yeah, the actors and these, it's equally praised by both sides. Like that's a minor miracle when you think about it, and I think points to the success of not only this movie but comedy in general. Like the success it can have if it's done right, and these guys did this right. Humor shouldn't discriminate. Okay, it it shouldn't. It does sometimes, but it shouldn't. And the best humor in South Park has always been like this is like we take shots at everybody. Some more than others, but you know, nobody should be safe from criticism, as we talked about. I talked about in my last video. So the puppets is huge, and it's not just oh, this would be funny. Like if you think that something, especially in a movie, is just happened by accident, you're wrong. You're 100% wrong. Or it was a coincidence. No. This shit is meticulously planned out. And with Parker and Stone, they're like, yeah, it will be funny, but here's the layers behind it. Um, yeah, a lot of this course and the ideas behind it goes back to us as individuals. Like we're just not equipped to interpret humor in a constructive way. So we're not taught to. And maybe I mentioned this in my intro video, but we're not taught to. We're taught to dismiss comedy as just mere entertainment and shits and giggles and just, who cares? Yeah, I was entertained. Now I am done with it. Instead of understanding the cognitive processes that are required to understand comedy, and the fact that most jokes don't exist in a vacuum. They're connected to, at least anymore, they're connected to real shit. Um, so, but for many who are not equipped to watch a movie like Team America and really think about what it means, they get distracted by the Gary pukes in the alley, which is a hilarious scene, but it's, there's gross out humor, there's lowbrow humor mixed in with it. It's easy to be like, dismiss it as that. So I always say, if your reaction to this movie was to Google puppet porn, you're part of the problem, right? Like if that is your focus, if you think that that's what this movie is best known for or should be best known for, you're part of the problem. Stop doing what you're doing, right? Um, so, uh, oh, I have this list of stuff, as you should know by now. So I'm just kind of going through these little bullet points before I get to you guys' comments, which I appreciate, by the way. Which do you have? Oh, which do you have a better chance of listening to? And like, this is all like, again, back to the bias thing, and just like humor provides access to ideas, da 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 da. Which you have more a better chance of like sitting down and listening to, right? Pundits on CNN or Fox News or whatever, saying, screaming liberals, conservatives, terrorists, right? Or hilarious puppets screaming dicks, pussies, assholes. The whole dicks, pussies, assholes thing is, I try not to use the word brilliant, but it's so good. Like, it sums everything up perfectly. Everybody can understand it, and it's not laced with sort of political sort of political leaning or bias. It's clear cut. It you hear it, you laugh, you listen, and they're the same thing, right? Two douchebags on the news screaming about libtards and snowflakes and conservatives and terrorists is the same argument. It's the same aesthetic as these ridiculous puppets talking about dicks, pussies, and assholes. So, like, again, comedy, saves the day. I don't know if it does. Um, but which do you have a better chance of listening to? And it used to be the news one, right? But our news system has become so incredibly warped and eroded, right? Now, with shows like The Daily Show and all that stuff, comedy news is viable. So, like, it's arguably more trustworthy if you look at the data. Um, but the whole dicks, pussies, assholes as a metaphor for our political system. It's easy. It's not complicated to understand, and it's pretty accurate. It's pretty accurate. We're making this a lot harder than we have to. I don't even know what this says. Comedy is built on humility, honesty, and an underdog mentality. So, like, punching up typically is the best kind of comedy that works. All ideas far removed from, but essential to, the popular conception of being American. Does that make sense? You see Team America, and a bunch of you mentioned it in your comments, right? Just this arrogance without any reason to back it up, right? Arrogance, um, stereotypical, right? Judgmental, ignorant, arrogance and ignorance, bad combo. And we are like full of it to the brim. Gone, post, especially the Trump era and up till now, gone are the concept of humility. Gone is the concept of honesty, right? Gone. Like, you're an asshole if you're humble, for the most part. Um, Admitting that you're wrong, like all these kinds of things. Um, so there. Comedy itself, those things are inherent in comedy. Honesty, humility, and this underdog mentality. And it seems like America as a whole has been running from those things. Like, those are weaknesses. When they're not. They're strengths. I would say. Um, the whole a lot of you guys mentioned, the whole blowing up most of Paris, blowing up Cairo, right? Um, no one mentioned the distance. They kept noting the distance from America that all these places were, right? This whole America centric, um, idea, uh, that we're sort of plagued with, that the world revolves around us. Um, but destroying things for peace, like you all mentioned that. And it took a couple of your comments. I can't remember who. Yeah, I think it was Michelle for the most part, but a bunch of you mentioned similar ideas. Like, the damage they did, they basically were doing the terrorists' work for them, right? Blowing up the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre and all this stuff is like, the, what the end result was. Terrorists were probably like, oh, sweet, thanks. Like, we didn't, now we don't have to do it. This sort of equal damage thing. It's just in the name of something different, right? Ours is in the name of peace, right? And I love, Michelle, that you put end terrorism in quotes. Um, and theirs is in the name of, religious belief or whatever, whatever's fueling that side. So, the end result is the same, right? Destruction and war and hatred and anger and all these kinds of things. Um, but that whole idea, this, how jingoistic, if you guys know what jingoism is, um, the concept of others and uh, and stereotypes. Gary becomes a terrorist, right? So jingoism is this sort of this flawed idea about, yeah, based on no knowledge or research or anything. So it's basically Gary going through the transformation into uh, a terrorist, right? They just put a towel on his head and make his skin dark and give him this horrible patchy beard and the whole language, like a bunch of you guys brought up that scene, and the scene with him speaking Arabic, right? Jihad, Muhammad Jihad, like the only words that don't mean anything, right? When put together. Um, so yeah, that's a theme in this movie that they're really attacking, and no one mentioned this either. Like this is sort of a two pronged parody. It's obviously a satire of the world, us policing the world. But it's also it's a parody of big action film like Michael Bay. There's the whole Michael Bay song about Pearl Harbor and how the movie, his Michael Bay movie Pearl Harbor sucked. And this is sort of a parody of that and how we romanticize this stuff, right? Someone mentioned the relationships. Like there's all these like inter Team America relationships that get as much attention as everything else. Um, how we romanticize this idea that we are this big, powerful nation and all this stuff, and um, so it's there's so much going on with that too, right? The montage song. If you guys got that far, you need a montage. Like basically saying, this it's a parody of big budget action films, um, and how they're so disingenuous and kind of ridiculous. And it's this criticism of obviously our geopolitical um, situations. So, yeah, exactly. Uh, let's see what else I got here. There's this is something that will come up all session too. Comedy is the best, I think, when there's something at stake, right? Like, yes, there's always room for dick jokes and people getting kicked in the crotch and things like that. It's always good. But the best comedy comes from something at stake. And here there's something at stake. This is pretty close to 9/11, right? This movie came out. And there's something at stake as a result. Like, Parker and Stone were like, we have to react to this. And, like, you know, I think they did a really good job of trying to present a nuanced arguments about these things. And that it would have been easy. It could have been really easy to do a movie and the puppets were Bush and Cheney and whoever and just make them look stupid. But they went a little above that fray to give us, you know, this masterpiece, right? So there's definitely something at stake. Um, And I can't remember who was talking about Gary. Uh, Someone was talking about Gary, and my take was Gary is sort of a metaphor for America, like just everybody, not the government, not corporate America, but that's like the citizens, the general public. And that whole scene where he kind of flames out and Lisa's like, "You're our only hope." And Gary says, "Why me? Why am I the only one?" Right? He doesn't want the responsibility. So that's sort of, that might be Trey Parker and Matt Stone's little editorializing, just sort of inserting that and being like, they're speaking for this. Like, no one in the country want. I don't think people want this. If that makes any sense. Why me? Why am I the only one? I don't want, you know, the fucking power. I don't want the guilt. I don't want the shame. I don't want the responsibility. Like, I don't want any of this. It's like, why are we in this position in the first place? So that's such an interesting, pivotal scene. Um, and oh, I think it was Caitlin. Yes, Caitlin talked about the pressure, which is certainly a valid interpretation of that scene, but I think it's bigger than just like men, this toxic masculinity, and with fighting and war and all those, the pressure for all those things. I think it's bigger. I think it's, why have we taken on this role? Why do we think we have this responsibility? Because you hear that all the time. Um, why me? Why am I the only one? Right? I don't want the guilt. I don't want the fucking power. I don't want the shame. I don't want responsibility. Um, all that stuff. So that's a really pivotal scene. And yeah, it was definitely Caitlin who talked about that. So that's just my take on it. Um, for what it's worth. Uh, I think this is successful because it does embrace, it has both types of comedy. I talked about this before, right? It's got the gross out, silly, ridiculous, over the top stuff, but then it's got, you know, all the other stuff that we're talking about, the satire and parody and things like that. Um, Michael Bay parody. Um, and some people are like, I couldn't get past the the gross, the cringy stuff. Like, a lot of it is cringy. And like, comedy should make you cringe. Period. Like, it's doing its job, right? It should go there. Comedy is the thing that should go there. It's one of the free remaining spaces in our discourse that is allowed to go there, as it were. Um, so if it's not going there, well, why why is it happening? Like, what's the point of doing it if you're not going to go there? No, that's my take on it, right? Comedy should shake you out of your normal, rote, everyday mindset. It should make you think differently and make you feel and make you cringe and make you just do something. Um, I say that all the time. We should all say, I never thought of it that way, at least once a day. At least once a day. This goes back to my humility thing, right? Only humble people can admit that they haven't thought of things. and that they, yeah, that they're paying attention in such a way that they might learn something, right? Um, and comedy is a great way to facilitate that. There's so many comedy specials, stand up TV, film, whatever it is, where I'm like, oh shit, I never thought of it that way. Boom, there, I said it already today. Um, and even some of your comments, like I'm reading through and I'm like, I never thought of it that way. And I got one in at least once a day. You should be saying that, like genuinely, not don't just say it because you know what I'm saying. How many days have we saved? I don't know what that means. Um, the action film Michael Bay parody. Uh, some people in the past have commented about this movie, like this movie wouldn't do well today. I disagree. I think the South Park guys have sort of carved out, like, it's expected of them to be controversial, to push boundaries, right? And success hasn't changed them. Like, they have more money than anybody. And they're still doing this stuff with Book of Mormon and even with South Park. Just like pushing boundaries, asking questions, being critical of the culture, starting with ideas, right? Not jokes. Jokes should adorn ideas in good comedy, and I think they've done a good job. So I ask the question a lot of times: has comedy changed, or have we changed? I think the answer increasingly is that we have changed, and we have become. You hear a lot of people bitch about, oh, we're too sensitive now. I don't necessarily think it's that, but I think it's not enough people are equipped to interpret comedy properly. Let's put it that way. Um, Exaggeration to the point of realization, like I've talked about that before. Like these guys, South Park guys, are masters of it, right? Um, just and then I'm getting there. I'm almost done. Um, some people have said it's hard to look past the racism of this movie, right? It's the depiction of Gary uh, as a Muslim and the Muslims in general, like just other cultures. And my reaction has always been like, you're not supposed to look past it. Like that's the whole point, is for you to confront it and be like, oh shit, am I that bad? Are we that bad? Like, exactly. We're supposed to look at it, right? You're supposed to stare it in the face and realize how stupid it is in many cases. Realize how ignorant most of our judgments are of other people and things like that. So this sort of makes you it makes you look at it, right? And that's what good comedy is supposed to do. So don't try to look past it. I guess that's the answer for people who say it's hard to look past it. Like, okay, well then don't. Like, look at it and be like, oh shit. Um, there were a couple of things from your comments. I mentioned Michelle and the whole equal damage thing. Like, the end result is inevitably the same when you do that. Um, but the the Film Actors Guild and Alec Baldwin and all that kind of stuff really has really kind of foretold or foreshadowed, if you want to say, the whole concept of being woke and wokeness. This is 2004, and basically what happened to all these liberal actors in the movie, right? The Film Actors Guild. What happened as a result of that is they end up basically supporting the terrorist, right? In their sort of fervent attempts to squash out, the establishment, in this case, the Republican establishment, like they end up aligning themselves with the enemy. So they're so woke that they end up, and you see it happening now. Like that pendulum swing of wokeness is like, okay, now these extremists, it's just bad to be on the extremes, right? So like the far left now has circled back, and they're virtually indiscernible from the far right at this point in terms of who their lack of tolerance and their discriminatory practices and things like that. And so they really kind of foretell that with the whole Film Actors Guild and Alec Baldwin, and they've pushed so far to the left that they are now back. They're supporting this terrorist, right? So I think it's really interesting and kind of fascinating that they did this movie, and over the course of time we ended up kind of right in the same place, if that makes any sense. So yeah, I mean, I think this movie it's sort of gained acclaim over time. When it came out, it was like, holy shit. But there's a lot to take in there. I mentioned, I think, most of the comments I wanted to from you guys. Michelle, Yando, still don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. You mentioned that they've had peace. That the South Park guys used the word duty. They had a duty to make this movie. I think that's an interesting. I like that take. Right, good comedians, people in comedy, like should see it as their responsibility or their duty to make movies and TV shows and comedy about these seminal moments in our culture, like these big events in our culture. And I think a lot of people, a lot of comedians shy away from it. Yeah, because uh, it'll hurt their bottom line or their image or whatever it is. Like there's a lot of that at play. But if you think about it, I've made this I've made this point time and time again. If being critical and making meaningful comedy that matters with something at stake is detrimental to profit, right? One, who cares? But two, if that's the case, explain South Park and The Simpsons. Like, explain it. Like, there aren't two franchises that have made more. There aren't two franchises that have made more money than those two, and they were consistently and genuinely topical from start to finish, pretty much, and continue to do it. Continue to be critical and meaningful, but also funny. So to say that being meaningful takes away from the comedy, or taking a stand or making a point will have you lose advertisers or audience or whatever. Like, it's kind of bullshit. It's kind of a flimsy argument. Um, so the whole duty to make this movie, I don't disagree. Um, Misunderstanding cultures. Um, Aiden and Andrew kind of brought that up, right? Like our understanding of what it means, and I think comedy is invested in this more too now. Is It's invested in helping us understand other cultures. I don't know if I brought this up before, but I'll talk a little bit about it in the next video. But the difference between exploitation and exploration in comedy. And it's very easy to exploit difference for our amusement, but it's more difficult to explore it and make it funny at the same time. It's like here, um, it's showing how most movies will exploit and not explore. You won't learn anything about what it means to be a Muslim, to be Islam, to be an Arab, um, whatever. You won't learn anything about that. You'll just continue to perpetuate. You'll exploit it for humor and whatever it is. Like, I think it's mocking that, right? Like that our understanding of these people is facial hair and head headwear. That's it. Um, there's a lot of comedy of late that looks to explore different cultures and inform us, and again attempt to relate to us. If anyone's watched Rami on Hulu, it's fantastic. Um, and it really, like, I learned so much about um, the culture of Islam, so much. And Master of None with Aziz Ansari, same idea. I learned so much about being a brown person in America. Like, learn, not just like, oh, they have a funny accent sometimes. Like, right. Um, Caitlin brought up the iconography, like the flag waving, everything has a flag on it, just like, we're America, we're America. And Gary and the Pressure, that I sort of fleshed that out a little bit, but yeah, that just relentless, like, we are relentlessly American. Like, why do we have to, like, why is that? Why is that a thing? And then Lou brought up is, we're a huge mess. Like, to the outside world, we're a huge mess, and we think we have our shit together. Like, that was my favorite. That was my favorite, and that's where I'll leave it today. Um, with Team America. So, if you stopped watching after the first scene, you should continue watching, because there's a puppet sex scene in there that's pretty sweet. Um, all right, there's that. I'm coming. I'm coming right back with a TV video in a minute.